Welcome to the FMCG guys in alliance with the CPG guys in the US. I'm your host, Daniel Torres, joined by the other host of the show, Efrain Rosario. Hi, Efrain. How are you?
Good, Daniel. Always good to be with you. How are things?
Very good, very good. Warm Barcelona today. Expecting not as warm Paris or Amsterdam for you.
No, not quite. Although we've been pretty lucky thus far. So knock on wood that it stays that way.
Excellent. Yeah, and very excited about the topic today. It's all about basically how to attract new customers. FMCG companies have had to really evolve with the evolution of technology and therefore society as well. And one of the ways that new customer attraction is growing the most and companies are shifting towards and have been shifting towards in the last few years is the so-called social commerce. Efrain, how would you define social commerce?
So I think I would actually direct people to their social media platforms to really explain what social commerce is, because I do feel that all of us who are on social media have in some way or form, shape or form, been exposed to social commerce. So if you've seen an ad on your social media feed, on whatever platform you choose to frequent, that has some sort of call to action prompting you to buy something, then you've seen social commerce at play. And what's interesting is, as you said, I think it's become big business and it's actually only going to get bigger. I saw a report recently that mentioned or estimates that social commerce is expected to grow to $3.4 trillion in sales by the year 2028. So certainly not something that brands or retailers can really, in essence, turn a blind eye to.
Yeah, wow, that's a big number. So there will be a space that definitely we should watch, and actually to learn more about it. Very excited to have with us today Rafael Schwarz from Territory Influence Consultancy, which he joined after a long career in FMCG in the industry. You may have heard his name because he's a very top voice on LinkedIn, where his posts get many more likes than mine do. So he has a lot of visibility, and we'll be keen to learn more about him, about social commerce. Hello, Rafael. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Hi, Rafael. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Excellent. Well, I'm looking forward to our discussion. Before we jump into it, and would love to, for the sake of our audience, but also for Daniel and myself, just to understand a little bit more about your background and your prior experience and what you're up to these days.
Sure, very happy. Well, I've been working for more than 20 years in the FMCG industry. The first 15 on the client side as sales and marketing director in both local and international roles at some of the major FMCG companies. I've been starting my career at P&G and then moved on to Reckitt, Mars, and Henkel. Been living in Germany, in Austria, in Switzerland, and in the UK. And now the last 7 years, I've been on the agency side. So now me and my team, we are supporting all the major FMCG companies and other industries across Europe with social media, influencer marketing services, solutions, and technology.
Great. And why actually did you, out of curiosity, why did you decide to go from the industry side to the agency side?
Yeah, it's something that doesn't happen too often in our industry, which is a little bit of a shame because, again, these areas are quite different, but there are enough similarities so you can really learn from each other and you can enrich each other. But I mean, the main driver for me was on the one hand side, really curiosity to learn something new and to really also take over more responsibility. I was in an international marketing role before, and I wanted to assume more of a general manager responsibility. So that was one driver. And the other one was really more like to work in a more entrepreneurial startup environment. When I joined our agency, it was still led by the founders. We were 100% family owned, and it was still run as a small startup, despite the fact that we already had international presence. So having that kind of startup experience and atmosphere was also something which was very interesting for me.
And you're definitely someone that I think we were talking about it before recording, that actually practices what you preach, and you have, like we were saying before, quite a astounding, or in my case, admirable presence on LinkedIn with a lot of following. This is part, I think, of like what we call social commerce. I know it's something that you actively help your clients in FMCG with. When did social commerce start? Like, how old is it? And is there a pre-internet precedent to it?
But it's a good question. I would guess it depends on how you define social commerce and what's your definition. If you and there are different definitions out there because it's such a new thing still. If you define social commerce as a fully integrated, social experience that involves, all the different steps in the customer journey from discovery to, to consideration to actual purchasing, then you could say that social commerce is nothing new because, that's the way we actually shopped for the last, millennia. If you think about the marketplace, thousands of years ago, it was a very social experience where, people came together, they had a chat. They were talking about all kinds of different things. And among others, they were talking about whatever the clothes that the emperor was wearing or not wearing and what kind of fruit was healthy and not poisonous, right? I think it goes all the way back to humankind. So we always had this kind of social DNA in us that, is part of social commerce. Obviously, if you define social commerce as just, transactions happening on social media, it's a way, narrower definition and therefore limited to basically the emergence of social media during the last years and the last decade or so.
I think we found to be the case with a lot of the emerging technology that has really become prevalent in FMCG these days. There's a lot of learnings that we can get from our counterparts over in Asian markets around social commerce. So Absolutely. What have you seen, and what have you seen both in terms of being things that we haven't yet seen adopted here in the European marketplace, and things that you saw that were born in Asian markets and have since made the transition over West?
Yeah, very, very true. Social commerce is already huge in Asia, particularly in China. I read recently that social commerce in China is already worth $350 billion US. So it's huge, and it recorded double-digit growth the last years. Last year it was growing 25%. But if you look at the reasons why social commerce is already so big in China and in Asia, there are a couple of things that I think also indicate where the journey is going for Western Europe and for North America. So one is the infrastructure has been in place for much longer. But if you think about China, particularly Tencent and Alibaba, they create these kind of digital ecosystems that integrate social media, social content, influencer marketing, community, information, shopping, and also payment, right? All in essentially one big digital ecosystem. So that is still something which doesn't exist. And I know it's something that, Mark Zuckerberg would dream about, I guess, every night, but it's not there yet, right? Then also, if you think about live streaming, for example, which again, a lot of people associate very closely to social commerce, that has actually culturally always been more relevant in China because consumers the audiences love this kind of entertainment aspect. They love, live shows. They love social interactions with kind of hosts and creators. So the whole live streaming, even without the shopping element, has been much bigger in Asia compared to Europe and North America.
So, Rafael, just real quick, for some of the folks in our audience who may not be familiar with the term live streaming, can you just explain at a very basic level what it is and how it works?
So live streaming in the West, if you think about Twitch, that would be, I think, what most people associate with live streaming. So somebody is actually recording live what he's doing right now, and that for a longer period of time. So whether that's, a live cooking show, whether that's gamers, who are playing games, I think live streaming is mostly in the Western Hemisphere known for gaming, actually. Esports, right, that are actually recorded live and are streaming live. Or whether that's in the context of social commerce, whether that's basically people explaining and presenting products and services and brands and encouraging the audience of the live stream to buy it here and now.
That's it, right? Which is that it's that final element, which is that there's a commerce element to it in regards to if you're watching a cooking demonstration or you're watching somebody on an esports platform, is that there is a call to action, and usually
that makes it relevant for social commerce. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, I know that there's fashion companies that are doing it now in Europe, for example, like social commerce propositions where they invite like an influencer or a celebrity for the case, and they like showcase like their season's new collection, and people can actually purchase at that point, right?
Yeah, and it has grown massively over the last 2 years, particularly, fueled by the pandemic, because it features this nice combination of information, entertainment, commercial. Right? It's like an infotainment or edutainment or whatever you want to call it. But it kind of emerges these different topics, and that's why so many people are fascinated by live shopping events.
Yeah, and then so we've seen in Asia. I mean, I remember 5-6 years ago that people were buying things on WeChat, which is their local WhatsApp/Instagram, and people were buying there. And for me, that seemed like from another planet. Now it's quite a lot more common for online shops to be linked to Instagram. In what other ways have Europe and North America, let's say the West, how have they caught up with social commerce trends that started in Asia?
Yeah, and it's amazing. Actually, just to come back to what you said in terms of Chinese and Chinese best practices, I don't know if you saw it, but last year in November on the Singles Day, 11/11, there were two influencers, two key opinion leaders or live streamers who've actually during 24 hours sold more than 3 billion worth in goods through their live shows. So it's an amazing potential that companies, but also brands and also influencers actually in Asia have realized and have therefore jumped on board a lot quicker than their Western counterparts. But I do agree. The pandemic has also opened up consumers' interest for these sort of shopping formats and entertainment and information formats in the West. I think TikTok is the prime example for that, actually. If you think about the growth of TikTok during the last 2 years, that has really amplified the demand of consumers for novel entertainment, interaction, highly interactive formats. And consumers are spending more and more time on social media. So companies have realized, and also the social media platforms have realized, that there is a potential to grab more of the pie, essentially, and therefore invest into social commerce tools to keep the audience basically on their platform instead of them then having to switch out to marketplaces or to a DTC shop to actually complete the transaction.
So you brought this up earlier, which is that the pandemic has, in essence, has raised awareness around some of these live streaming and social commerce opportunities on the various platforms, because quite frankly, people have been having to, in essence, shift a lot of the things they used to do offline to online. So awareness doesn't seem to be as big of a hurdle as it once was. In terms of, I guess, other barriers to adoption that you've seen, what are some examples of those in terms of what else is keeping people from doing live streaming or to, in essence, buying through live streaming and social commerce more than they're already doing it today?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I read something that McKinsey kind of calculated that COVID-19 kind of increased and accelerated e-commerce adoption by 10 years or something like that in the US. So it was a major jump. So consumers definitely have learned to shift their purchasing behavior online, and therefore are also more open to social commerce. I think the other thing that helped obviously is that consumers are just spending so much more time on e-commerce and on social media as well. So it was quite natural to combine then their browsing and let's say top of the funnel activities where they got inspiration from influencers, they got inspired by brands, right? They have already used social media for the last years to discover new brands, to discover new products. But what was missing was the final part of the funnel, which was actually the shopping, the actual transaction. And I think that's where still there are major gaps between Europe and particularly between continental Europe and between Asia and also between Europe and North America. Because if you look at the social media platforms, they haven't rolled out all the necessary features, particularly in terms of checkout to Europe, to continental Europe. So they've a lot of them have taken what has been existing in Asia and in China. I mean, you mentioned WeChat already. A couple of years ago, you could actually do everything. You could chat to a brand. You could actually you could follow an influencer. You could browse products. And you could, with one click, actually buy the product and it was delivered to your home. That's still that functionality, this full checkout and payment functionality still doesn't exist to a large degree in Europe. And different platforms have different degrees of technical rollouts. So if you look at TikTok, for example, I mean, they have the partnership with Shopify since 2 years, but actually only rolled out those features into the US, into North America, not across continental Europe. They're starting now in the UK as well. But they're not yet in, France or Germany or Italy, Spain. If you look at Instagram, Facebook, the other major player in social media, they last year launched Shops as in kind of their integrated e-commerce solution or social commerce solution. So you can already tag products. You can tag products in posts, in reels, in stories. You can integrate product tags already today in either ads on Facebook or on Instagram, or in earned content pieces or influencer content pieces. But again, the integrated checkout actually only exists in the US so far.
Yeah.
So there are still some technical barriers on why social commerce hasn't seen the same adoption as in Asia. But I would assume these barriers are gonna be eliminated in the coming months.
Yeah. And just one quick build on that, which is I think from a enabling standpoint, you mentioned it before, events like Singles Day and Prime Day in the US, for example, I think are big drivers for people jumping on these platforms and using them for commerce as well.
True.
Right? So I think while both of those events are relevant in Europe, there's not at least to my knowledge, there's not a Born in Europe or a Europe specific.
No,
event
I would say you're right. You're right. I mean, I would say Black Friday is pretty well adopted these days, also in continental Europe.
True.
It is really becoming a major retail event. I mean, even offline, not only online. But you're right. I mean, if you compare Black Friday in Europe to what it is in the US or what Singles Day is in Asia, it's not the same size.
Nothing is the size of Singles Day in Asia.
No, that's also true.
Yeah, definitely. And like a lot of people, like a lot of the investments that consumer good companies are going to be doing into social commerce, I guess they'll be relatively big and will have to be approved by C-level people, which will be relatively...
Well, actually, no, right? So that's the whole interesting aspect of social commerce is that it actually kind of democratizes the whole retail aspect because it doesn't require big investments into...
Okay.
I mean, if you think about offline retail, I mean, the amount of investment is enormous. I mean, you need to set up a shop, you need to set up a warehouse, you need to organize logistics. I mean, all of that doesn't exist in digital. So if you think about the initial investment, it's actually pretty low. I think it's much more a question of willingness to open up, willingness to learn, willingness to experiment and innovate that is holding companies back. It's not the actual monetary investment.
So I was going to ask you, Rafael, like if you had to explain to somebody in consumer goods that's relatively ignorant to the potential of social commerce, how would you define the current scenario of consumer goods companies in relation to social commerce?
Yeah. So I think here we need to really separate the regions where they operate, right? So while in Asia, social commerce is already so big, you cannot live without it. Particularly in mainland Europe, we are still at the stage where consumer good companies and particularly FMCG companies, they need to learn and they need to experiment and innovate to be ready for when all the technical features are going to be available from the social media platforms. And in the US, we are a little bit more advanced. So here, CPG companies can already look at some of the best practices, some of the cases out there to really apply those and make sure they start leveraging the opportunities of social commerce. In Europe, we are still much more at an early stage where it's all about testing and learning.
So just in terms of understanding, you've kind of alluded to it as well before with regards to some of the different platforms where social commerce can happen. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitch. Can you give us a sense in regards to, I mean, are there certain types of consumers that we should think about with regards to like certain consumers that tend to gravitate towards one or the other, either based on their demographics or perhaps in terms of some of their interests and attitudes? Well, how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, absolutely.
And even for like the types of products that you're selling in each platform.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's true.
No, absolutely. Very good question. I fully agree. I think we do see that different types of consumers gravitate to different platforms, either because of their demographics. So let me take one obvious example. Facebook has been around forever. So they have a lot more, let's say, comparably older audiences because it has been around for such a big time compared to TikTok, which is super young and super new and therefore commands a lot more younger kind of Gen Z type of audience. So I think that's one aspect is if you, depending on who actually is your core consumer target group, brands will need to select then what is the right social media outlet to engage with those, which is, I mean, similar to social media marketing in general, not only to social commerce. But then I think the other thing which companies need to pay attention to is indeed different expectations that consumers have on these platforms. So let me take the example of TikTok versus YouTube. I mean, the type of content that people consume on TikTok is very, very different compared to any of the other platforms. Let me take Instagram. I think Instagram is the biggest opposite actually of TikTok. While on Instagram, I mean, everything is super polished and kind of you're trying as a consumer to show this pitch perfect world that you live in with all the nice holidays you do and the best, clothes you have and, the newest car you've just bought, right? On TikTok, it's the opposite. On TikTok, it's all chaos and creative and raw. And some of the most successful pieces of content on TikTok are actually, I mean, they look like they're a product of luck and coincidence and not planned in any way like you would expect it on Instagram. So I really advise brands to be careful, not only to really be clear about who is their core audience and therefore make sure that you are on the right platform, what these people are, but also make sure that you have the right content that resonates with those people. And the content needs to be very, very different if you look at the different platforms, both from a technical perspective, but also from creative perspective, from a look and feel perspective. It has to resonate with the respective audience. And there's very little overlap actually between the different audiences and the different social media channels they use.
Interesting. That does not overlap, that you really have to treat each social commerce platform as very independent from the other. But it's true. Like when you're looking at TikTok and Instagram, it's like two different.
And I think it's also to the point of understanding who your core target audience is, right? And it may be that you don't need to be on all these platforms, right? Depending on how you answer that question.
Absolutely. And then, I mean, it also depends on how much you already are invested, let's say, in marketplaces. If you are keen to open up another distribution channel, another commerce channel, it depends on whether you want to focus on your DTC shop versus, a mass retail approach. So, I mean, they're all kind of strategic decisions that also have to take place at a much more, higher end level before companies can jump in. But still, I would say, and at the moment, we are really advising clients that they need to start, learning and experimenting to at least have some sort of data to be able to make those strategic decisions, because otherwise it's going to be very hard for top management to make a decision between the different channels, between the different, business models, between the different distribution models, if you have no data whatsoever.
Yeah. And along these lines, like Rafael, when you're going to see a consumer goods company, what does best practice look like for FMCG brands today? And I know that this is a question that would probably require a lot of detail and a lot of granularity, if you like. But overall, what would you say are the main guidelines?
I would go back to my previous point about it. It really depends on where you are, right? So if you are a CPG company that is mainly selling in Europe, there is really no kind of clear success model. I mean, you have to really start to learn and to experiment for yourself, because there's no established path that you can, kind of copy. So here, we are really at the moment really helping clients to set up those, kind of test and learns. We're helping clients to set up, an Instagram shop, a Facebook shop, where we are helping them to start, experimenting with live shopping events, with live stream shopping events, so they can actually gain those first, learning experiences and assess, what is the return on investment as well for each one of those. But if you look at the US, they're already a bit more advanced. There are lots of interesting cases and success models out there that consumer good companies could emulate, particularly if you look at fashion brands or beauty brands. I mean, there are a lot of really, really successful social commerce cases out there from both, digital native, small startups, DTC, independent beauty brands, but also from, some of the big leaders in the space like L'Oreal or Burberry in fashion that are very interesting. Very happy to talk more about that, actually. I mean, what they've done right, and then what I see is some of the successful elements that they've applied.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if there's an example you can give our audience and ourselves,
sure.
I'd be personally very interested.
Sure. Well, let me give you a couple of examples from the US. I mean, one is Item Beauty, for example, is an independent beauty brand that has been...
What's the name? Sorry?
Item Beauty. And they have really been built around the social media following of their founder, who is a TikTok star, basically, Edison Reed. So they've built their essential business model around TikTok, essentially, and around the audience that the founder has gathered on TikTok. Glow Recipe is another independent beauty company. They have joined TikTok last year only, the TikTok shopping program only 2021. So they added basically a shopping tab to their TikTok account. And it was very interesting because the brand is really doubling down on social commerce now after it saw a 600% increase in sales in March 2021. So it was a phenomenal success for them. And again, it was linked actually to the fact that one of their highlight products was featured by an influencer on the platform. But also, if you look at brands like that are maybe a little bit more known here in Europe, like Charlotte Tilbury. I mean, they have launched a virtual store on an experiential social commerce platform called Obsess to enable their customers, really enable them kind of a fun, interactive social shopping experience. So everything from, chat and interactions to all the way down to, actual checkout and delivery of the products. I will mention L'Oréal. They've not only launched Instagram shops for many of their beauty and cosmetic brands, but last year they even started to integrate augmented reality makeup experiences. So super cool, because now their customers who are browsing let's say a NYX makeup Instagram page or a Lancome or Maybelline New York page on Instagram, they can not only discover new products, they can not only discover inspiration from branded content or from influencer content that is on Instagram, but they can virtually try out basically the makeup before they proceed to the checkout on the same app, on the same channel. Nike is another one, by the way, more in the fashion space. Very, very interesting what they're doing. They've created an entire new app which is called Nothing But Gold, NBG. It also features, not only content on sports and lifestyle and well-being, particularly for younger female audiences. But again, you can interact there, you can educate yourself there, and you can actually shop all within one app, within one ecosystem. So very interesting what some of these companies are doing.
And what I love about those examples, Rafael, is that they really bring to life the two of the points you made earlier, which is one, understanding who your core target audience would be, and two, recognizing that their expectations may be very different, and how those actually are then brought to life on those platforms has to be different as well. So I love seeing that. So wanted to get you to look into your crystal ball and think about so that's what's going on today. What do you see coming next? What do you see taking shape or making its way to Europe from a social commerce standpoint in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I definitely see that live shopping is going to become huge. Also in Europe and North America. If you look at some of the figures in the US, Statista predicts that social commerce and particularly live shopping is going to account to between 10 and 20% of all e-commerce sales. So it's going to be massive. And also, if I look at from a consumer perspective, I think particularly now during this last 2 years of the pandemic, we've all learned that whatever can be digitally consumed should be also should be there. So I think that's not going to go away. I mean, people are looking for much more for independent brands, for locally sourced brands, for specific brands that match their own values. So all of that will actually enable what we discussed previously, which is kind of the democratization of retail, because you want to select a brand and the product that perfectly fits to yourself, to your own style, to your own values. And since with social commerce, there are basically not that many barriers of entry anymore, not like in traditional retail and traditional FMCG. I think that will further, spur a lot of new brands, a lot of new launches, a lot of new startups coming into the field. I think also, if you think about kind of democratization of content production in general, I mean, these days, everyone with a smartphone is also a content producer. And they can produce, great quality content anytime, any place, wherever they are, and share it basically with the world. So if you think about social commerce as an extension of that and link it with concepts like community commerce, where people are actually kind of collaborating together to find products, to identify the right products for them, to source them, maybe at a better price together, that is all again going to streamline and further fuel social commerce. And then I think also, if you think about kind of the general distrust that we as consumers have and have learned to further harbor during the last 2 years versus governments, versus institutions, but also versus companies and advertising, I think again peer-to-peer recommendations, authentic content, user-generated content, influencer content. I mean, all of that is gonna benefit from the fact that we trust other people, but we distrust, advertising, we distrust companies, we distrust institutions. So if you then in the future, can find any post basically, or any post, any content piece on online on the social media will contain a shop now button where you can immediately check out and order that particular product or that particular service, that particular brand. That is super powerful. I think that's again going to really help to facilitate social commerce.
Yeah, no, it's going to be fascinating because that's the thing, right? If we look back 3-5 years, like the double jump that there's been in terms of the evolution of e-commerce, but particularly social commerce is like, crazy.
No, it's amazing. And I read something, I think Statista predicts that social commerce is going to grow to over 3.4 trillion by 2028. I mean, that's like in 6 years' time. So that's a huge amount of money that in the future is going to be made through, social transactions. So it's very amazing to see that and to see the growth predictions across the world, not only in Europe or North America. It's also going to continue growth in Asia.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we're talking now, Rafael, at the beginning about like how you transitioned from being in the industry to later going to agency. There's this question we ask all our guests on the show, which is if you were to talk with your past self at the beginning of your career, what humble advice would you give the young Rafael?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of advice. I think one is I would advise, the younger self to basically continue always investing into lifelong learning. I think it's something that you should never see as accomplished, and that will count more and more in the future. As we also, I mean, all of us are going to work longer than we previously thought, or than our parent generation did. I think the other advice I would give myself and any other young professional is never compromise on your core values. It is not worth it. I mean, not for money, not for a career. It just creates troubles down the road. So you don't want to do that. I think the other advice I would give is always look for mentors that can help you, that can also provide a really honest, reflection about where you are, what you do, what should be next. I think mentorship is extremely powerful in business in general, in your career, in your professional life. So really look for those mentors that can really help you. And I think maybe the last advice is really make sure that you invest in your family and health. I mean, it's like for your profession, there's always a second job, there's always a second chance to advance your career. You don't want to have that in your family, and you definitely don't have that when it comes to your health. So make sure that you protect those and then prioritize those actually versus your job and versus your career.
This was Rafael Schwarz from Territory Influence. Very interesting conversation. Ephraim, what are your takeaways?
I think, like our audience, I learned quite a lot from listening to Rafael talking about social commerce. For me, first and foremost, I find it interesting to hear Rafael's point of view about where Europe is with regards to or in relation to some of the other markets that I think are fairly closely associated with social commerce. So if you think about, for example, in relation to where China is, or even in relation to where the US is on social commerce or topic or specific things like live streaming, it's really interesting to hear Rafael tell us about that. We're here in Europe, we're in the test and learn phase of social commerce. And that means that we're still, in essence, feeling our way around the different platforms, understanding how those different platforms may bring different expectations for different target audiences. So if you think about, for example, how you want to craft your content for use on Instagram versus how it looks on TikTok or whatever other platforms you may be looking at. So I think that, it's interesting just to see where we are on that spectrum as the social commerce topic continues to evolve here in Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one aspect that I found very interesting and that I wasn't that aware of, as you heard before, is the fact that the barriers of entry are actually very low. So you don't need to make huge investments to make social commerce effective. I guess that later it depends on the scale of the business, but it just reinforces this change of paradigm in the corporate world, where it's less about big strategic bets necessarily, but those are also important. But you also have to be ready to be entrepreneurial and test and learn, right?
Absolutely. And I think, the other thing that I took from this conversation were some of the results that he shared with us as well.
Yeah.
He referenced the US luxury beauty brand that had seen a 600% increase in sales year over year. I mean, those are impressive numbers, whatever base you're working off of, but it's impressive nevertheless. And and I think, like you said, it's interesting to see that this whole experimentation mindset and being able to, in essence, combine those with those big strategic bets. And with those kinds of results, sounds like a pretty solid formula.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks, Ephraim, again for being here with me and putting up with me another day. Thanks to our listeners as well for engaging with us. It's been great to this journey so far this year, because we're actually having growth month on month on the podcast and on the LinkedIn page, which, by the way, I invite you all to join and follow us there to see the latest content, also videos of the podcast that we do and other FMCG related topics. And of course, an invitation also out there to contact us, to get in touch with us via LinkedIn and let us know if you have any suggestions for guests, topics, any type of feedback, even if it's very critical. Please drop us a note and get in touch.